4 years after COVID changed our world forever, the CIA confirmed what many suspected from the beginning. COVID escaped from a lab in Wuhan, China. For years, most intelligence agencies wouldn't touch that theory. Now most of them agree. But here's the real story. While they debated the origins, COVID killed tens of millions of people throughout the world, including my dad, and caused trillions of dollars in economic damage. The elephant in the room isn't just how COVID started, it's how different powerful groups work to keep you from knowing the truth. Scientists, the government, the mainstream media, the Chinese government, they weren't working together, but they all pushed the same false narrative. Anyone questioning the natural origins theory was a conspiracy theorist and probably a racist to boot. Hey, I'm Ken LaCourte. I spent a lot of hours digging into all of this to give you a decently complete, unfiltered breakdown of the coronavirus cover-up. In the next few minutes, we'll walk through the evidence pointing to a lab leak, how the scientific establishment tried to bury it, look at China's cover-up, how the media versus Trump politicized everything, and finally, how the truth bubbled out. Look, this is a horrible story of how our leaders and our institutions failed us. It's almost unbelievable. So first, let's look at the different theories that were considered at the beginning of COVID. The one we all heard is officially known as zoonotic transmission, that COVID was transmitted from a bat to a human, possibly at a wet market in Wuhan, China. But this theory had some obvious problems. The virus in bats and COVID in humans has a gap that suggests a missing link virus, which no one has ever found, and we'll get to that in a minute. There's also no evidence of a link between COVID and any specific animal at that market. It quickly, almost immediately, became apparent to anyone who looked into it that there were huge reasons to believe this virus had leaked from a Chinese lab. First, let's talk about the lab. The Wuhan Institute of Virology sits just across the Yangtze River from where the very first COVID cases emerged. It's a level 4 biohazard lab, the highest security rating, and they specialized in bat coronaviruses. They had the largest collection of bat virus samples in the world. But even before the lab opened, there were scientific concerns worldwide about its safety. U.S. State Department officials visited in 2018 and sent back alarming cables, warning about inadequate safety protocols and undertrained staff. These warnings specifically highlighted the risk of a SARS-like pandemic due to sloppy procedures. The lab's star researcher, Zhi Zengli, nicknamed the Bat Lady, she discovered the RATG13 6 years beforehand, a coronavirus sharing 96.2% of its genetic code with COVID-19. She found it in a mine many miles away where workers had died from a mysterious pneumonia years earlier. Despite that critical connection, she waited until after COVID's outbreak to reveal its existence. Yet in March 2019, months before the outbreak, Zengli published a warning saying a SARS-like coronavirus outbreak from Chinese bats was highly likely. Now, her team wasn't just studying these viruses, they were creating hybrid versions capable of infecting human cells, testing how bat viruses might evolve to threaten humans. American taxpayers helped fund this research. The EcoHealth Alliance, led by Peter Daszak, channeled NIH grants to Wuhan for studying bat coronaviruses. This included gain-of-function research, experiments that enhanced viruses to study their potential ability to infect humans. These were dangerous experiments, conducted in what they called BSL-2 conditions, far below recommended safety levels. Now, the timeline gets suspicious in late 2019, before the known outbreak. The lab suddenly removed its entire virus database, over 22,000 samples and sequences, without explanation. And China still refuses to restore access to this day. Satellite imagery showed increased hospital traffic nearby. Chinese officials ramped up biosafety protocols and began getting new safety equipment. According to later U.S. intelligence reports, in November 2019, 3 WIV researchers fell ill with COVID-like symptoms, which sent them to the hospital. This was weeks before China reported its very first case. Now, the COVID virus has some unique features that raise questions. A special part, called a furin cleavage site, helps it more easily infect human cells, something the bat virus doesn't have. Usually, viruses like this spread from bats to other animals before reaching humans. With other similar viruses like SARS and MERS, scientists quickly found these middle step animals. But with COVID-19, even after lots of searching, they still haven't found that missing link. Probably because it doesn't exist. The early case pattern completely contradicts China's official story. While initial cases were linked to the Hunan market, later analysis revealed many early patients had no connection to the market at all, which suggests it wasn't the origin point, but rather an amplification site where the virus spread efficiently between humans. These aren't speculations or conspiracy theories. Each point is documented, each warning was logged, each timeline verified. The question isn't whether these facts exist, it's why so many people work so hard to keep us from knowing them. I'll put all of my resources and all of the background that I have on this down in the comments below. Scientists knew this was risky, but not only did the United States help fund the lab, the European Union did as well. And hey, just so you know, if I make any mistakes here, I'm not a scientist, but I research well, I'll correct it in a pinned comment and I'll explain it below. Okay, so in America, the cover-up started immediately, day one, at the top levels of government health organizations. Now, I'm going to go into speculation for a second here because it's something I can't prove, but I believe it. I'd bet everything that I own that when an aide first told Anthony Fauci about the serious lung-related illnesses coming out of Wuhan, China, he knew exactly what happened. I'd love to see him hooked up to a lie detector and asked if he ever believed that it was from an errant bat that people were eating near Wuhan. Okay, so on July 31st, 2020, Fauci received an urgent email. Jeremy Farrar, director of the Wellcome Trust, warned that top virologists had serious concerns about COVID-19's origins. Christian Andersen, a prominent scientist, wrote that the virus had, quote, unusual features that, quote, potentially looked engineered, end quote, and it didn't fit evolutionary patterns. Fauci's response? He advised gathering evolutionary biologists to analyze the data and report findings to authorities like the FBI or MI5 if concerns prove valid. The next day, he organized a confidential teleconference with NIH Director Francis Collins and other leading virologists. Now, during that call, scientists discussed the virus's troubling features, particularly its furin cleavage site. This genetic feature, which makes it especially good at infecting humans, raised red flags. But other virologists pushed back, arguing labs wouldn't use novel viruses for experiments. Within days, these same scientists who expressed private doubts began drafting what became called the proximal origin of SARS-CoV-2. Published in Nature magazine, this influential paper declared the lab origin, quote, not plausible. That's a pretty strong statement. It effectively marginalized the lab leak theory as a conspiracy. But their private communications told a different story. Robert Gary, one of the authors, admitted in emails that a graduate student could have engineered SARS-CoV-2 using known techniques. This stark contrast between public statements and private concerns says something else was at play. Peter Daszak, who funneled the NIH money to Wuhan, led another effort to shut down debate. He orchestrated a letter in The Lancet labeling lab leak discussions as a conspiracy theory, without disclosing his clear conflict of interest, and The Lancet didn't either. They said science was being, quote, threatened by rumors and misinformation around its origin. We stand together to strongly condemn conspiracy theories suggesting that COVID-19 doesn't have a natural origin. This letter had the effect of silencing scientific debate for months. And from my point of view, they're criminals. The pressure to conform for everyone else was intense. Scientists feared losing funding or facing professional backlash if they supported alternate theories. And those who initially raised alarms about COVID-19's origins, they changed their tune. They too called it a conspiracy theory that would do great harm to science and the international harmony. They sent emails to Fauci, quote, wondering if there's something NIH can do to help put down this very destructive conspiracy. And to be clear, it was money shaping the narrative. Many of these scientists dismissing the lab leak theory had financial ties to NIH grants. At the heart of the danger was the gain of function that we had talked about earlier. And a decade earlier, Fauci himself had endorsed the practice, writing, quote, important information and insights can come from generating a potentially dangerous virus in the laboratory. Isn't that the truth? These experiments were so dangerous that they were banned in the United States from 2014 to 2017, but they continued in Wuhan through NIH grants that they essentially washed through the EcoHealth Alliance. The Wuhan Institute conducted experiments combining bat coronavirus genes with human-adapted backbones under these projects. In essence, the funding was banned from the United States, but outsourced to a country with much sketchier quality controls. The scientific establishment's response shows how quickly scientists can be corrupted by politics and money and self-interest. Leading scientists publicly dismissed ideas that they privately said were plausible. Organizations meant to question everything instead enforced a narrative. Then, months later, when COVID was exploding all over the world, this same establishment wondered why so many people questioned their advice on masks and lockdowns and vaccines. Scientists' refusal to ask basic questions left China plenty of time to set their own narrative and gloss over anything they didn't want the rest of the world to see. And at the same time, some people knew exactly what happened. Unfortunately, these people were in China. And when it comes to lying and keeping secrets, China doesn't mess around. Besides deleting its virus database, China's cover-up went into overdrive. The first thing people noticed early on was a Chinese doctor who was warning colleagues in December 2019 about a SARS-like virus. Chinese authorities grabbed him and forced him to sign a statement admitting to, quote, spreading rumors. He later died of COVID. Citizen journalist Ken Kishi disappeared in February 2020 after reporting from Wuhan's hospitals and streets. When he later resurfaced, he posted on Twitter saying, quote, over the past year and 8 months, I have experienced a lot of things. Some of it can be talked about, some of it can't. 3 days after he disappeared, so did Fang Bin after he posted a video showing body bags at a Wuhan hospital. He served 3 years in prison for, quote, picking quarrels and provoking trouble. They weren't alone. Over 450 Chinese citizens were arrested for sharing information over the internet that contradicted the official story. China's first response was lying about the essence of the disease itself, first claiming no human-to-human transmissions despite clear evidence otherwise. They delayed notifying the World Health Organization about anything and denied seeing infections among healthcare workers. The CDC estimated that 1.4 million Chinese died from COVID. And while to this day, China admits to only 83,000, like so many other numbers and facts stated by the Chinese government, they're absolutely nonsense. When it came to denying how the virus was unleashed on the world, China's propaganda machine kicked into overdrive. State media pushed theories about that COVID began in Italy or India or from the United States government. Meanwhile, they kicked out at least 13 US-based journalists when they had even mildly criticized their reporting. And in April 2020, China implemented strict regulations requiring government approval for all academic papers related to COVID. And the World Health Organization played along too. They delayed declaring a public health emergency until January 30th, despite mounting evidence of a widespread transmission. Their investigation into COVID's origin, it was a joke. Chinese authorities tightly controlled who they could see or not. Their investigators couldn't examine raw data, and Chinese consistently blocked their efforts to investigate the lab itself, claiming that would politicize the research. The WHO report reads like Chinese propaganda. The strategy worked better than it should have because many people stayed silent to maintain their access to China. Scientists didn't want to lose research collaborations. Companies worried about losing market share and money. This created a global culture of self-censorship around China's role in the whole thing. And it went beyond censorship. Using humans and bots, their state media amplified propaganda on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter, platforms all banned in China, but useful for getting out their message. China's actions followed a clear pattern: destroy evidence, silence witnesses, manipulate data, spread disinformation, and attack anyone asking questions. Now, that's pretty easy to do in China since they have no free press and a lot of jails, but you'd expect the West to do better. They didn't. Instead, China and the scientists hiding their secrets got a huge unintentional assist from a man who wasn't trying to help them at all: Donald Trump. In April 2020, President Trump publicly stated he'd seen evidence suggesting COVID-19 came from a Wuhan lab. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo backed him up, citing significant evidence pointing to a lab origin. They didn't give specifics, citing classified intelligence, but Trump's statement immediately galvanized the mainstream press. Not against China, but against him. The response was immediate and almost universal. Outlets rushed to discredit the lab leak theory, not because of scientific evidence, but because Trump said it could be true. Politics poisoned their coverage. Look, you can love or hate Donald Trump, I don't care. But if he single-handedly cured cancer, there'd be articles about how he destroyed the careers of cancer doctors, especially if he was up for election in 7 months, which he was. What should have been a scientific investigation turned into a political football overnight. Headlines from outlets explicitly labeled the lab leak theory as debunked or discredited without any investigation. And since Trump called it the Wuhan virus, they got to cry racist as well. The Washington Post called it a conspiracy theory that has been repeatedly debunked by experts. The New York Times described it as a theory that scientists have dismissed. CNN called it a fringe theory with no evidence. Writer Drew Holden calls it experts say reporting. Find someone with credentials who can confirm what you already want to say, and then have them say it so you can quote them. The scientific press followed suit. Journals like Nature and The Lancet continued just dismissing the theory completely. Almost no outlets actually did independent investigation during the pandemic's first year. Instead, they frame natural origin as the only credible explanation, relying on statements from organizations like the WHO or the scientists with vested interest in dismissing it, like Peter Daszak. Social media companies joined in, ramping up censorship big time. First voluntarily, then later during the Biden administration because of government pressure. Facebook banned posts suggesting the virus came from a lab as part of their removal of 18 million COVID posts. Twitter made posts and accounts disappear, just like the Chinese. YouTube suppressed videos discussing it, something I hope they've stopped. Well, we'll see. The whole fact-checking world is highly politicized, and they joined the censorship. They partnered with social media companies to enforce content policies, again, often citing the early WHO statements or Daszak's own denials to dismiss it all. PolitiFact called claims about a lab origin pants on fire in early 2020. Later, they retracted that. As they did a number of times that year, most journalists abandoned their basic principles to put an end to the Trump presidency. Even after Trump lost, the impact lingered. It took months for mainstream outlets to seriously consider the lab leak scenario despite mounting evidence. Overall, we saw a perfect storm of silence. Scientists wouldn't speak up, journalists wouldn't investigate, politicians wouldn't push for answer, politics stopped the truth about COVID from coming out. Overall, they sacrificed scientific inquiry and investigative journalists on the altar of stopping Donald Trump. The narrative started to shift in 2021. That's when the Wall Street Journal published a groundbreaking report that talked about those sick Wuhan lab researchers. After that, some outlets that had dismissed the lab leak theory started to treat it seriously. Major publications quietly edited their previous coverage. Debunked conspiracy theory became disputed theory. Stories questioning the natural origin hypothesis began appearing in the same outlets that had mocked that concept just months earlier. After the election, the political pressure backed off a little bit, and cracks started slowly appearing in the natural origin narrative. Researchers and journalists, they started looking at inconsistencies in China's story and the lack of evidence for an intermediate host. Major voices started speaking out as well, including former CDC Director Robert Redfield, who publicly stated in March 2021 that he believed the virus most likely came from a lab. Intelligence agencies started shifting their stances as well. In early 2023, both the FBI and the Department of Energy concluded with a moderate amount of confidence that COVID-19 came from a lab. They based their evidence on genetic analysis and circumstantial evidence that it just continues to mount. The CIA's January 2025 declassified report went even further. Congress got involved too. Senator Josh Hawley's COVID Origins Act forced declassification of intelligence related to COVID's origin, revealing some findings about the Wuhan research and U.S. funding connections. It was the House investigation that uncovered those emails showing top scientists saying things publicly and saying things privately that were very different. Even the WHO changed course. Its director called for a renewed investigation, which was a stark departure from their earlier acceptance of the Chinese explanations. New scientific evidence emerged suggesting that the unusual structure resulted from laboratory manipulation. The gradual release of intelligence reports, media reversals, and new scientific looks at it shifted public opinion, and what was originally dismissed as a conspiracy theory is now the mainstream position. But the reality, to many people, it's now history. China's stonewalling and destruction of information made proving what happened impossible, and that's exactly what they counted on. We've never seen anything as destructive as COVID in our lifetime. The cover-up's damage goes far beyond just COVID-19. It shows us how powerful institutions can align to suppress inconvenient truths. Scientists, journalists, media companies, the WHO, and the scientific establishment hasn't fundamentally changed. Many who dismissed the whole lab leak theory still hold powerful positions. Anthony Fauci was given a pardon by President Biden. Journals that published biased studies haven't reformed their conflict of interest policies or have different policies to fix it. China, no real consequences for them. The cover-up's lessons are clear. Our institutions failed when we needed them most, and there really hasn't been any kind of accountability. Okay, so this is the part of the video where I usually recommend a similar video I've produced, but this one is just too depressing. So I'm going to recommend something different. Boobs. Specifically, why do men all over the world go crazy for those things? Interestingly, there's one part of the world where they don't. Scientists and sociologists have studied the heck out of this, and I dive into their best explanations. Hey, thanks for joining. Subscribe if you want to see more things like this, and I hope you have a good one. Thanks.